Next customer. Please come this way, I called out as the cash registers grew increasingly crowded. Swiftly, I opened the adjacent register and began guiding customers through their transactions. After a concerted effort, the congestion eased, allowing me to return to restocking shelves. "Mary, you're amazing at ringing up customers so quickly," remarked a fellow part-time employee, breaking the rhythm of my tasks. In this bustling supermarket, a diverse mix of high school students and individuals like myself populated the workforce, making each shift enjoyable. My name is Mary, a 45-year-old part-time housewife who found solace and purpose in this role for the past decade. When my child began elementary school, I sought employment and landed a part-time position at this local market. The environment, filled with fellow housewives and understanding managers, suited my lifestyle perfectly. Over the years, I transitioned into one of the senior part-timers, familiar with both customers and colleagues alike. However, a sudden change disrupted our routine when our beloved manager was transferred to headquarters for what seemed like a promotion. His replacement, a newcomer from the headquarters, lacked the familiarity and competence we had grown accustomed to. Slowly, the atmosphere soared as his managerial style clashed with the store's dynamics. Rumors circulated among part-timers, speculating on the president's wife's preferences for young, charismatic managers. It became apparent that our new manager saw her favor, often seen engaging in conversation with her. Despite the dissatisfaction brewing among us, none dared to voice their concerns to the president's wife. Instead, some part-time housewives and student employees quietly began resigning. As the situation unfolded, I found myself contemplating whether it was time to seek alternative part-time employment, unsure of what the future held in this changing environment. I found myself in the crosshairs of the president's wife, her sudden inquiry catching me off guard. "You've been working at the store for quite some time, haven't you? How's your child? Already in college? Which one?" she prodded, surprising me with her directness. "Yes, I've been here since the previous manager," I replied cautiously, not eager to delve into personal matters. Then, with a cutting tone, she remarked, "You seem rather incompetent. I doubt you even attended a decent college, did you?" Her words struck deep, but before I could respond, the register area became inundated with customers. I offered a quick nod to the president's wife and swiftly attended to my duties. In truth, my educational journey had ended with middle school. High school had been a tumultuous time, marked by bullying and eventual dropout during my third year. Since then, I had carved out a life as a part-time worker, eventually meeting my husband in a similar setting and building a life far removed from academic pedigrees. The president's wife, however, seemed to embody a stark contrast. She often boasted about her prestigious university background, yet curiously avoided divulging its name. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off, lacking any particular interest. Perhaps she harbored preconceived notions about part-time workers like myself, assuming we lacked higher education. I recalled overhearing her discussing such matters with the store manager, leaving me to wonder if she looked down upon us. As murmurs circulated among fellow part-timers about similar interrogations, I found myself bracing for another encounter with the president's wife when, sure enough, she returned to the store the following day. "Excuse me," her voice cut through the air, signaling another potentially tense exchange. My attention snapped up when the president's wife directed her gaze towards me, a smirk playing on her lips as if she found amusement in some private joke. Despite the urge to react, I managed to rein in my irritation, keeping my emotions in check as she began to speak. "So, you're just a middle school graduate, aren't you? I never pegged you for a college goer, but to think you're managing here with that level of education is quite something," she remarked, her words dripping with thinly veiled condescension. I couldn't help but wonder where she had gleaned this information from, until I recalled the previous day's incident when the store manager had been scrutinizing the part-timers' resumes in the office. It seemed that what should have been confidential information had somehow found its way into the president's wife's hands. Annoyance bubbled within me at the thought of her freely sharing such personal details with other employees. I had never sought to fabricate my educational background, but the audacity of someone spreading rumors about my academic history grated on my nerves. While my fellow part-time colleagues seemed unfazed by the revelation, the president's wife took every opportunity to remind me of my supposed educational shortcomings. It became her refrain, peppering our interactions with thinly veiled jabs. "Maybe you wouldn't understand, Being just a middle school graduate, she would quip, using my education as a pretext to assign me menial tasks like cleaning. The repetition of her taunts grated on my nerves, feeling a growing resentment towards my workplace. I began to question why I subjected myself to such treatment, feeling increasingly disheartened by her relentless needling. A few days later, when she returned to the store, her mere presence was enough to stir up irritation within me. As I attempted to sidestep her, she caught my eye and gestured towards the cardboard box storage area, an area typically left untouched as it was designated for supplier use. "People like you should be familiar with garbage," she sneered, her words laced with disdain. "Middle school graduates like yourself are just here to collect a paycheck." Her words stung, delivered in the privacy of the back room, shielded from the scrutiny of customers. It was a deliberate attempt to belittle me, a reminder of my perceived inadequacies in her eyes. I had always managed to endure, especially since most interactions occurred in the bustling sales area. But on that particular day, the weight of my pent-up frustration became too much to bear. "Excuse me, but I believe I earned my paycheck through diligent work, regardless of my educational background," I interjected, my tone laced with simmering anger. The president's wife appeared taken aback, clearly unaccustomed to such pushback. "If you're going to be here, why not contribute something beneficial to the store? We're never quite sure what you're up to," she retorted, her words dripping with disdain. Ignoring the curious glances of passing colleagues, I pressed on. "And what exactly are you contributing by gracing us with your presence? Chatting with the manager, flirting with male employees and high school part-timers, looking down on the rest of us?" I challenged, refusing to back down. Her face flushed crimson with rage as my words hit their mark. "Unlike someone like you, I have a busy schedule. Coming here takes time out of my day," she shot back, attempting to assert her superiority. I couldn't help but scoff at her assertion. "Do you truly believe that? Neither the employees nor the customers share your sentiment. It's intriguing how some with impressive educational backgrounds prove utterly ineffectual in practice," I countered, releasing the resentment I had long harbored towards her condescending attitude. Clearly flustered by my unexpected retort, the president's wife struggled to conjure a suitable response, resorting to tired clichés. "Do you honestly think you can continue working here after speaking to me like that?" she challenged, her voice tinged with disbelief. Without hesitation, I delivered my final verdict. "Then I'll resign," I declared, refusing to tolerate any further belittlement. In response, the president's wife let out a mocking laugh. "Well, that'll save us on labor costs," she sneered, her words dripping with derision. I returned the smile, nodding in agreement. "Yes, that's right. Good for you," I affirmed before making my way towards the locker room. Inside, I found a fellow part-timer who had witnessed the earlier exchange. I poured out the details of what had transpired, recounting the frustrations that had been building up. "Mary, are you really quitting?" she asked, her expression reflecting the sadness of our shared experiences over the years. "It just hasn't been the same since the manager changed. It feels like we're only here out of obligation," I confided, echoing her sentiments. "With so many people leaving, you'd think they'd hire more staff, but they'd rather cut costs." She nodded in understanding. "It's becoming unbearable. I don't blame you for wanting out." Leaving the locker room behind, I headed towards where the manager and the president's wife were engaged in conversation. Without preamble, I made my intentions clear. "That's it, I'm done," I stated firmly, meeting their surprised gazes head-on. The president's wife chuckled, seemingly amused by the news. "So, the junior high school graduate is calling it quits. I wonder where someone like you will find work," she remarked, her tone dripping with condescension. I refused to let her words rattle me. "Even if I have nowhere else lined up, I won't be coming back here. I'll return my uniform next week. Thank you for everything," I declared, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. As I exited the supermarket, a sense of relief washed over me. The following week, when I returned to return my uniform, I found the store abuzz with commotion. The manager was being berated by irate customers near the cash register, suggesting some sort of transaction error. Despite the chaos, I felt a sense of peace knowing that I had made the right decision to leave. With my resignation already settled, I made my way towards the office to return my uniform. As I approached the door, the unmistakable voice of the president's wife reached my ears, giving me pause. Reluctantly, I pushed the door open, finding the former manager inside. Despite his new role at headquarters, my ingrained habit led me to address him as manager out of reflex. It seemed the president's wife had been engaged in conversation with him, but she hastily departed upon my arrival. "What happened at the register?" the former manager queried, his expression troubled. He proceeded to inform me of a spate of recent complaints at the store since my departure. With a cascade of resignations following mine, the store had been left scrambling to cope with the sudden exodus of part-timers and student workers. Though the manager attempted to fill in on the sales floor, his lack of familiarity with basic tasks like stocking shelves and operating the register led to a litany of customer complaints. Today's incident, however, involved a particularly embarrassing misstep. The president's wife, while conversing with a male employee, was mistaken for staff by a customer. Brushing off the inquiry, she exacerbated the situation when the manager inadvertently disclosed her true identity, sparking further discontent among patrons. As the register area swelled with customers, the absence of experienced part-timers compounded the chaos. Both unfamiliar employees and the manager found themselves manning the registers, resulting in numerous errors and lengthy delays. The escalating frustration among customers culminated in the manager facing a barrage of complaints, exacerbating an already tumultuous situation. Turning to me, the former store manager sought insight into the unfolding debacle, hoping for some semblance of understanding in the aftermath of my departure. When asked why I had decided to quit, I didn't hesitate to respond honestly. The former manager seemed genuinely interested in my reasons for leaving, and I felt it was only fair to provide him with the truth. In turn, he confided in me that he had heard rumors regarding the president's wife's educational background. While he lacked specific details, the word on the grapevine was that she had only graduated from high school. This revelation left me pondering the irony of her previous educational condescension. Could it be that the president's wife, with her supposed lack of higher education, was projecting her own insecurities onto others? It certainly made her seem all the more formidable and unpredictable. 2 weeks later, the supermarket I had once called my workplace stood deserted. The usual throng of customers was conspicuously absent, a stark contrast to the bustling scenes of my former shifts. It's no surprise, given all those complaints, I mused to myself as I observed the desolate scene. Lost in thought, I was approached from behind by the former store manager. After exchanging pleasantries, he mentioned a new store opening just one station away. He extended an offer, asking if I would be interested in joining the team. It appeared that an employee he had trained was being promoted to the position of store manager at the new location. Knowing the caliber of this individual, I felt a sense of trust and reassurance. I nodded in agreement and wasted no time in reaching out to my former part-time comrades. Upon confirmation of my role at the new store, I discovered that some of my former colleagues would also be joining me, a comforting realization amidst the uncertainty of change. Under the guidance of an understanding manager, I quickly settled into my new role. The atmosphere was welcoming, and I found it easy to establish rapport with my coworkers, both old and new. The new store introduced innovative offerings, such as local side dishes and bread, which proved to be a hit with customers. As I embraced this fresh start, I couldn't help but feel optimistic about the opportunities that lay ahead. As I settled into my new role at the store, I was greeted by familiar faces from my time at the previous location. The transition to the new store went smoothly, marked by a successful launch and positive feedback from both customers and employees. However, I soon heard troubling reports about the old store. It had become notably quiet, and the manager found themselves facing frequent scoldings during head office meetings. A string of new hires as part-timers quickly came and went, exacerbating the ongoing staff shortage. Finding a new part-time job had brought a sense of relief, and I was content to work happily as I had before. But about a month into my tenure at the new store, the president's wife made a surprising appearance before me. Her unexpected visit seemed to be aimed directly at me, as she wasted no time in addressing the rumors she had heard. "I heard there's a junior high school dropout working at our store again, so I came to check," she stated bluntly. I couldn't help but sigh at her accusatory tone. "What's the issue?" "I haven't done anything wrong," I replied, feeling unfairly targeted. She persisted, laying blame at my feet for the troubles at the old store. But I refused to accept her accusations. "Isn't it more accurate to say that you're the one engaging in power harassment?" I challenged, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Former colleagues from the previous store attempted to intervene. But I waved them off. I couldn't let them shoulder the blame for something they weren't responsible for. As a middle school graduate, I can't possibly be held accountable for all the employees quitting, I asserted, refusing to be intimidated. The president's wife's anger flared at my defiance, but I stood my ground, supported by nods of agreement from fellow part-timers. If you're having trouble understanding, let me spell it out for you. Your disdain for our educational backgrounds and the manager's incompetence have created a toxic environment, I explained, my words ringing with conviction. In the end, no one wants to endure power harassment while working part-time, and it was time for the president's wife to acknowledge the real issues at hand. When I accused the president's wife of power harassment, she immediately raised her voice in denial. "Are you trying to frame me without any evidence?" she retorted, her tone sharp with indignation. Just as she attempted to grab hold of me, the manager intervened, asserting firmly, "Can you please stop doing that to our part-timers?" Despite the risk to his own position, the manager stood his ground. "I am the manager of this store, and it's my duty to protect the employees. I will fulfill my role, whether you're the president's wife or not," he declared, earning applause from the other part-timers. With a resigned sigh, I reached for my smartphone. "I have evidence of power harassment," I stated calmly before playing a video. The footage showed the president's wife berating another part-timer at the previous store, clearly demonstrating a pattern of abusive behavior. As more part-timers stepped forward with their own recordings, it became evident that we had all experienced her mistreatment. "We're going to sue her," I announced, met with resolute nods of agreement from my colleagues and the manager. Furious at the manager's defiance, the president's wife impulsively fired him on the spot. But to her dismay, I revealed that I had recorded her dismissal as well, ensuring the manager's protection. Realizing the depth of her self-inflicted predicament, the president's wife attempted to flee. But before she could escape, I confronted her one final time. "There are more important things than education, aren't there? Sometimes humanity matters more in society," I remarked pointedly, causing her to pause. "How did you know?" she muttered, inadvertently admitting to her own insecurities. With her self-destruction complete, the president's wife retreated at a speed I had never seen before. In the aftermath, we pursued legal action against her, armed with solid evidence and the support of fellow part-timers. As news of her misconduct spread, similar complaints emerged from other stores, leading to a reckoning for her behavior. Forced to confront the consequences, the president demanded she repay her debts by working. It was a satisfying sight to witness her laboring angrily at a nearby drugstore, a fitting end to her reign of mistreatment. With a trustworthy manager at our helm, we continued our work with renewed dedication, free from the shadow of power harassment. Do you really think a company would hire the child of a poor single mother like you? My goal was to work at the same bank where my father worked, but during my final interview, the notorious demon instructor said this to me. It was clear he looked down on me for coming from a single mother household and had no intention of hiring me. I struggled to keep my composure as the interview worsened. Reaching my limit, I took out my phone and called my father. You see, my father is actually the president of the bank. My name is Emma Miller. I'm a 23-year-old college senior searching for a job. My parents divorced last year, making my mom a single mother. They both wanted to live their own lives, so I naturally stayed with my mom. Despite the divorce, my future plans were heavily influenced by my father, the CEO of the largest bank in the country. I admired him and aspired to work at his bank. Tomorrow, I have my final interview. I'm not the best student, and when I shared my goal of working at the bank, my teachers and peers not only tried to dissuade me, but also ridiculed me. I thought the ordeal would end after the interview, but looking back, it was truly awful. One day during my college years, a friend named Julia asked, "Hey Emma, have you decided where you're going after graduation?" For me, there's only one choice. The bank, I replied confidently. But our conversation drew murmurs from those around us. Just as I wondered if I had said something strange, Julia spoke up again. "Emma, it's hard to say, but you should know your place." To my shock, someone I considered a friend was insulting me. As I tried to argue back, another classmate chimed in. "It's impossible for you. That bank is the largest in the country and the hardest to get into from this university. Only one person from here has been hired in the past 10 years. I knew that, of course. I hadn't told anyone that my father was the bank's CEO. If I did, People would assume I got in through nepotism, which would tarnish my father's reputation and make me feel inadequate. I hated being misunderstood and judged unfairly. Emma, I'm saying this for your own good, Julia continued, but I cut her off. I don't need your advice. Everyone's eyes were on me, their cold stares piercing my heart. Why do I have to hear this? I thought, as our teacher, noticing the commotion, approached. What's going on here? She asked. Miller says she wants to work at North Trust Bank, the boy answered. The teacher's face tensed up. Are you taking society for granted? Even the teacher, who was supposed to support students, denied my dream. There was no one to stand up for me. Well, if I want to go there, what's wrong with that? I retorted, determined to defend my ambition. I objected, but the teacher continued, piling on more criticism. You're naive, she said. My father is an interviewer for North Trust Bank. They call him a demon interviewer, she added with a smug look. The teacher's surname was Anderson, a 29-year-old woman. If I encountered an interviewer with the same surname at North Trust Bank, it would likely be her father, a demon interviewer indeed. Yes, that's right, she continued. My father doesn't like new talent. He says it's good enough if he interviews 100 people and hires 2. Is that at the Sun Plaza branch? I asked, curious about the connection. Yes, she replied, and you're from a single mother household, right? I wondered why she would ask that, but answered honestly, yes. Then the teacher showed a sinister smile. At that time, I had no way of knowing the reason for her smile. The argument ended with the bell signaling the start of class. From that moment on, the way people looked at me grew colder. My friends, starting with Julia, whom I thought was a close friend, and my classmates who attended classes with me, distanced themselves. It was as if they didn't want to associate with a fool. Their reactions worsened with each exam I passed. The North Trust Bank hiring process had 4 stages. A written test in the first stage, followed by 2 interviews with people from the head office for the second and third stages. The fourth and final stage was an interview with the hiring manager for the desired work area and the head office hiring manager, in other words, the highest-ranking hiring manager. I wanted to work at the Sun Plaza branch and had managed to pass the third stage. How did you pass the third stage? They asked, now surprised and anxious about my progress. Most of them had failed their desired company's second stage interviews. It had been 3 months since the job hunting season began, and in my class alone, there were no confirmed hires. The atmosphere was filled with panic, envy, and jealousy. I could be the first one to get a job offer. Those who had been so arrogant now ostracized me even more due to their pride. However, I got used to that life at university and decided to focus solely on myself. My motivation was to get an offer from North Trust Bank. My mind was set on that goal. One day, after class, Teacher Anderson started attacking me in front of everyone. All right, everyone, listen up, she shouted to the students preparing to leave. Everyone turned around, curious about what was happening. Emma Miller has cleared the 3rd round of North Trust Bank's exams, she announced. The atmosphere around us suddenly became heavy, but with her next statement, everyone seemed to catch their breath. But it seems she'll fail the 4th round. Huh? What do you mean? I muttered involuntarily. Seeing my reaction, the teacher twisted her face into a sneer. The interviewer for the 4th round has been decided. It's my father, the demon instructor Anderson. The surroundings erupted in surprise and cheers. Serves you right. Know your place. Good. The classroom filled with voices condemning me in unison. I couldn't believe it. Everyone I thought were my friends had turned their backs on me during this job hunting process, even though I had done nothing wrong. Despite that, those around me harassed me and hurled abusive language at me. At first, I thought it might be a way for them to relieve the stress of job hunting. But it was different. I realized the situation around me was rooted in jealousy. They were envious of me for challenging something they wouldn't dare to. There's no way I could lose to someone like her who isn't even good at studying. There's no way someone like her could get into North Trust Bank. If she can make it, then so can I. If Miller is going, I should have tried as well. But that place is difficult. It's the most challenging. It's impossible. So why is Miller trying without hesitation? It's wrong. She's trying for a place that even I can't get into. I can't forgive that. It's strange. The reality became apparent as job hunting progressed. Among those who passed, those who failed, and various others, no one here had much hope. I was being attacked because of jealousy. The final straw was the teacher's words and actions, especially since her father was in charge of hiring at North Trust Bank. If the teacher led the attack on me, the students overflowing with jealousy would just follow her lead. On that day, I finally couldn't take it anymore and stormed out of the room. When I returned home, my mother gently encouraged me. Wrapped in her warmth, I cried. I took a break from university for a while, and before I knew it, the day of the final interview had come. "Don't forget, just do your best," my mother said as I left the house. Upon arriving at the interview venue, I was guided to the waiting room. Initially, there had been nearly 300 applicants in the Sun Plaza area, but now only about 10 remained. Only 3 would be selected from this group. Just as I was about to close my eyes to concentrate, my name was called. "Please come in." "Hello, thank you," I greeted as my final interview began. There were 3 people in the room. Anderson, the teacher's father, just as she had said, a man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer, about 10 years younger than my father, and a man in his 30s, presumably in charge of keeping records, sitting at a slight distance with a computer. The interview began with typical questions from Anderson, starting with a self-introduction and my motivation for applying. I answered these questions without difficulty. Then, the complaints started suddenly. "I don't really like female bank employees," Anderson said. Not knowing what to say, I fell silent. "Because they have quiet voices, are physically weak, and many think they can please people just by serving tea," he continued. I realized this man must be the type to mistreat his subordinates, and this would be a stressful interview. Silence is taboo in an interview, so I racked my brain and tackled the situation. I was in a sports club, and I think I'm strong. I'll do my best with any job given to me, just like a man. I tried to appeal, responding flexibly to his complaints. However, he didn't find it amusing and clicked his tongue, directing his gaze toward the papers in his hand. I felt something was off at this point. This interview was clearly going too far, yet the chief hiring officer, who should have been higher ranking than Anderson, said nothing. Upon closer observation, the chief hiring officer looked younger than Anderson. Maybe Anderson was pressuring him too. That's what I thought, but there was nothing I could do about it. I could only sit quietly and endure the interview. After a brief silence, Anderson spoke again. It seemed he would be in charge of the entire interview. "You seem to come from a single-mother household, am I wrong?" he asked, probably looking at the documents I submitted from the university. They included my address and family composition. "Yes, my parents divorced, and now I live with my mother," I replied. As soon as he heard my words, Anderson began to laugh, his sinister smile echoing through the room. "I see you're from a single-mother household. What business does a poor person have here?" He blatantly changed his attitude. As the teacher's sinister smile crossed my mind, I began to sweat. I struggled to find the correct response and began to feel anxious, but it was Anderson who started talking first. "Do you think there's a company that would hire someone from a poor single-parent family like you?" he mocked. "Huh? Just because I'm from a single-parent family, I won't be hired. You're going to assume I'm poor." I couldn't help but raise my tone. Of course, Anderson reacted to that. It was as if he had been waiting for me to fight back. "Should I take your attitude as defiance toward me, your interviewer?" I was frustrated but couldn't say anything back. This was the bank my father worked at, the one I had always admired. I didn't want to lose because of this one man, but I didn't know what to say in return. "Why don't you say something?" Anderson further pressured me. The moment I heard those words, something inside me snapped. My consciousness fell swiftly, and I became incredibly calm to the point where I couldn't believe it myself. "Understood," I said. Anderson seemed puzzled by my response. While staring at him, I stood up from the hard metal chair. "Hey, what's with you suddenly standing up?" he asked. Finally, another person spoke. "Having been sitting the whole time. You've finally gone mad, huh? What do you plan to do?" "I know about you because I've heard from my daughter," Anderson said, revealing that the teacher had shared information about me. "Is this not a leak of information?" I thought, but it didn't matter now. I took my phone out of my bag and suddenly started making a call. "What are you doing? Making a phone call? Are you mocking this interview? Stop it now, or I'll reject you right here." Anderson threatened me, but I wasn't fazed at all. I spoke into the phone. "Hello, Dad. Your father is here. What can a person from a single-parent family do, clinging to their separated father?" Was that the laugh from the hiring manager? Yes, that's right. A guy named Anderson. "Hey Dad, can you come to the interview room now?" Of course, he agreed. "I just finished visiting a nearby branch, so I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait for me, okay?" my father said before I hung up the phone. The person in charge of the recording stared at me with wide eyes, surprised by the unusual scene. But of course, the one who reacted the most was Anderson. Pointing at me, he said, "You're finished. Making a phone call during an interview? Unprecedented. There's no way you'll pass. Go home and go to bed or something." I finally decided to argue back. I couldn't take it anymore. "This isn't even an interview. It's you who's finished, Mr. Anderson." The chief hiring officer and the recorder were astonished by my sudden confrontation with the interviewer. Judging by their expressions, no one had stood up to this man's abusive behavior until now. The recorder's eyes were shining. Were they expecting Anderson to be punished? Anderson slammed his right hand on the table with all his might, a loud thud echoing throughout the room. The men were surprised, but I didn't flinch. "Brian Wilson, you know him, right?" I asked. For a moment, Anderson looked as if I had hit a nerve. He immediately countered, "Are you mocking me? There's no way anyone wouldn't know the president of this bank." To Anderson, who was confidently showing off his composure, I added, "So if my last name was Wilson until recently, would you think it's a coincidence?" Time seemed to stop for the three of them. The chief hiring officer and the recorder stared at me with wide eyes. Anderson then stood up from his chair and muttered, "What did you say?" His face showed a somewhat uneasy expression. "Emma Wilson. That was my full name until recently. My father is Brian Wilson, the president of the bank. 63-year-old Brian Wilson." "You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening." Anderson let out a strange scream. This was no longer an interview. At that moment, my father entered the room. As the door opened, he said words that echoed my own feelings. "This is hardly an interview at all. Mr. Wilson, thank you for your hard work," the two men said, standing up to greet my father as soon as they saw him enter. I looked at my father and felt the extraordinary presence he commanded. The president of the bank stood before us, and Anderson's face turned pale. His mouth hung open in shock. My father then spoke to him. "Hey Anderson, what were you doing to my daughter, huh?" My father was a big man who had practiced judo. With his shaved head and a scar on his forehead, he looked intimidating. His deep, resonant voice was one that everyone found frightening, even the once confident Anderson. "Ah, yes, sir," Anderson squeaked out, unable to maintain his composure. "I don't want to hear your excuses," my father cut him off. He then turned to the man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer. It was the first time I learned his name, Green, from the nameplate that had been bent and hard to read. "Green, aren't you the chief hiring officer? Have you let this tyrant run wild until now?" my father demanded. "I'm very sorry," Green replied, bending at a 90-degree angle and bowing. The young clerk in the room looked terrified, even though he had done nothing wrong. He was drenched in sweat. "Hey, clerk, what's your name?" my father called out in a gentle voice, which only made it more terrifying. "My name is Harris." "Mr. Harris, can you send today's interview record to my PC? You're also recording the audio, right?" my father asked. I later learned that this bank's interviews were not only transcribed, but also recorded as a backup. Thanks to that, Anderson's misconduct was exposed, and he was punished. Anderson was trembling, like a frog stared down by a snake. "Hey, Anderson." "Yes, what is it?" Anderson stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He was a completely different person from earlier. "Apologize to my daughter. It's not because she's my daughter, okay? You've trampled on the feelings of young people who want to join this bank," my father commanded. At my father's words, Anderson bowed deeply and apologized. "Sorry." But I couldn't forgive him, even after seeing that. "Dad, I can't forgive him," I said firmly. When I murmured, weakly, my father nodded in understanding. Walking up to Anderson, he seemed like a lion about to hunt a small animal. "Do you know what will happen to you if you do something like this, Anderson?" My father's pressure made Anderson freeze. "You didn't just do this to my daughter, right? We'll see later in the records. But how many victims have you had besides her?" No one could intervene in this interrogation-like scene. Even I, his daughter, could barely watch in silence, feeling disgusted. Anderson began to speak to my father, sweat pouring down his face. "At least over 100 people," he admitted. I was shocked to hear that he had done the same thing to more than 100 people. Furthermore, the fact that he was left unchecked made me doubt the hiring practices of this company. I felt distrustful, even though it was my father's company. "Hey, Green," my father called out. "Yes. I'm busy with overseas projects, so I trusted you and left the hiring to you. Well, this is my mistake in choosing people. It's my fault that it ended up like this. So I'll take responsibility and reform personnel so there won't be any more victims like this. You two should be prepared for punishment, okay? And Anderson, I'll never forgive you." Anderson gasped, frightened. My father continued, "I plan to gather all the victims and create a victims group. I'll bravely make it public in the media. I'm prepared to face any consequences, so you should be prepared too, right?" Hearing this, Anderson collapsed on the spot as if he had lost his sanity. My father moved away from him and opened a window. Oxygen returned to the tense room. Everyone had seemingly forgotten to breathe. And so, my job interview ended. By the way, I passed. It wasn't due to my father's favoritism. It was apparently the result of a discussion among hiring managers from all areas based on the recorded audio. As a result, the hiring decisions of those who were rejected by Anderson were also reconsidered. The news broke the next day, and my father bowed in front of the media. Many people were impressed by his attitude, and he continued as the bank president. On the other hand, Green, who had been the chief hiring officer, voluntarily resigned, and Anderson was sued by the company and the victims group. Anderson, whose past tyranny was gradually exposed, was arrested for defamation. Meanwhile, at the university, the teacher with a forced smile congratulated me in front of everyone. At that moment, my father and the principal appeared in the classroom. "Miss Anderson, this is Brian Wilson, the president of North Trust Bank," the principal introduced. "Oh yes," Miss Anderson replied, her expression faltering. "I've seen him on TV, so I know who he is. Emma Miller's father." "What? What did you say?" I added to the surprise of the teacher's words. "He's my mother's ex-husband and my father." My words caused a stir in the class. Humans have a tendency to flatter those with power. When they realized I was the daughter of the bank's top executive, everyone in the classroom became agitated. It was as if they had wished they'd have been friendlier to me. "Miss Miller's father is the president of North Trust Bank," the teacher said upon learning the truth, becoming an empty shell. The principal then addressed the teacher. "This school is able to operate thanks to the support of Mr. Wilson's bank. But it seems you've been bad-mouthing Mr. Wilson's daughter along with the rest of the class, haven't you?" "Well, that is never mind the excuses. Tell me only the truth. Is it a fact?" Pressed by the dean, the teacher finally hung her head and admitted, "Yes. Mr. Wilson wants to discontinue support for this school. If those who harassed Miss Miller voluntarily leave the school, he says the support will continue. What will you do?" The choice was clear to me as I listened. The teachers seemed to understand as well and ultimately resigned from the school, effective immediately. As they left, they apologized to me, but their voices were so quiet that I couldn't make it out. In the end, more than half of the classmates who had attacked me together withdrew voluntarily from the school. When my father said those who don't come forward before my daughter names the culprits will be considered for legal action, one by one they confessed. Given the power on display, it was a natural outcome. Ultimately, those people escaped legal action, but their enrollment in the university was not recognized. With my father's help, I secured a job offer, and my path after graduation was set. All that's left is to do my best for the remainder of my college life. My life is just beginning. I vowed in my heart to do my best to someday become an exemplary